this episode, we'll continue our look at the leadership system of the vanilla game, starting with buffs. Here we'll see much more clearly the problems inherent in the vanilla game's modifier system. Much of the point of this series is showing the unnecessarily complicated web of what modifiers work with each other and what do not, due to the poor design in the vanilla code. Because AOTR vastly overhauls and simplifies all of it, fixing the poor design in the process to make the game as fun and dynamic as the code actually allows it to be. But you can only truly appreciate the simplification once you've seen the problems and the state of the vanilla game. Notice where the description reads modifier type buff. This is a different kind of damage and armor boost than leadership. Only certain powers have this description. Another one is Elven Wood. Notice also where they state stacks with leadership and spells. This is different than the leadership description that reads stacks with buffs and spells. This difference is important. Much like with leaderships in Part 1, notice these buffs do not state they stack with other buffs. So if you use Rallying Call with Elven Wood, Tainted Land, Frozen Land, or War Chant, they won't stack. Remember in Part 1 how the result of just having Aragorn's leadership brought the Angmar troops down from 40 to 27 units. Let's see how Rallying Call looks alone. Here you can just see the blue-green effect of the enemy using Rallying Call on his troops. "24 units remain, so roughly the same as just a leadership boost. Now let's see if a land buff stacks with Rallying Call.
Waiting for orders. We serve the Iron Crown.
24 units, the exact same amount as before. Buffs of any combination do not stack, so time will not be wasted covering the others. This is a common error with players to combine them together, but it's only a waste. This concludes Section A. The next section will cover whether buffs stack in team games. It promises a few pleasant surprises that many players don't seem to know about, so stay tuned. In the last episode, we looked briefly at the impact of buffs in single-player games and whether or not they stacked in single-player games. In this episode, we'll dig deeper into the unnecessarily complicated web of the vanilla leadership system by looking at whether buffs stack in multiplayer games. This will continue to pave the way to better understand and appreciate the simplification of the whole system in the AOTR mod. In this demonstration, it was hard to capture the use of my allies' rallying call, but you can just see the AI use it on my troops here in this freeze frame. Then I quickly use Frozen Land. Here you see a stunning victory. 25 Gondor troops remain. Buffs can stack. The same holds true with combining Frozen Land with Elven Wood and War Chant, but there's some unfortunate design flaws with the other combos. Let's see what happens first with allied Elven Wood and Tainted Land, then allied War Chant and Rallying Call. Seven units remain. You can see the team roster is clear. Needless to say, this is one of the most unfortunate and problematic design flaws in the game when teaming up with either Mordor or Isengard. Now let's see Rallying Call allied with War Chant. It's a little tricky to see, but notice the red effect of my War Chant around the blue-green effect of my allies' Rallying Call. You can also see on the left side of the screen my War Chant is in cooldown, so you know it was used. "32 units remain. Now let's look at the last buff combo possible. Allied Frozen Land and Elven Wood. reality 2 remain. As you've now seen, only select allied buffs stack, while others cancel each other out completely. Now, as a sort of addendum, let's see if allied heroes would work for stacking leadership, as allied heroes were not explicitly covered in Part 1. Here you can see I have Aragorn, with my ally having Boromir. "24 units remain. Remember in Part 1 that with just Aragorn there were 27 units, which did not really change from having another hero. Obviously, even having an allied hero makes no difference either. This is all part of the poor design in the code, which we'll get to later in this series. So let's do a brief recap of everything we've learned about buffs and leadership in allied games. What buffs stack in team games? Only Angmar's Frozen Land with any other faction's buffs, except Tainted Land. And then, only one of those can be active with Frozen Land to stack with, since none of the others stack with each other anyways. What buffs do not stack in team games? Any other faction's buffs with each other. While damage and armor stats will not stack, there are minor effects that will stack from these buffs. These include Frozen Land's slowdown effect on enemy troop movement speed, Isengard's version of Tainted Land having the pillage ability for your own or allied troops, and Elvenwood's fear effect nullifier. And lastly, it should be noted that even allied heroes do not stack leaderships, just as in single-player games. Now that you've seen what buffs can stack, the next episode will explore whether buffs can be nullified. In the last section, we took a look at what buffs stack in multiplayer games. In this brief section, we'll cover some similar ground, clarifying on what buffs can be nullified and what it looks like when they cannot. I've seen many players think they can cancel out various buffs, only to be sorely mistaken. It's part of the mechanics of the game, as too many in the player base don't seem to fully understand or appreciate. But so often it can cost a player or a team of players the game, so this video will help to clarify this issue. This is also important to know for those who wish to know more about the Age of the Ring mod, as the mechanics are almost the same. Differences will be touched on at the end of this video, but more fully explored later in this series. All too often, I see players try to cancel out an enemy player's buff like Frozen Land with Tainted Land by putting the one over the other. But this is also a waste. Both buffs will remain active in the same place at the same time, but there are exceptions to this rule. Other land buffs that do not cancel each other out are Frozen Land versus Elven Wood and Frozen Land versus Tainted Land, so for brevity they will not be shown. The only ones that cancel each other out are the elves' Elven Wood and Isengard's Tainted Land. Here is the Elven Wood buff. You can see the gold glow for the buff. Then Tainted Land, and now the glow is gone, but the red player has it. Now let's see Tainted Land cancelled by Elven Wood. So timing is crucial. It's usually best to wait until the enemy casts his land buff first. These are the only buffs able to be cancelled out. Even War Chant and Rallying Cry cannot be nullified. For the sake of time, we won't cover the others here. It's enough to know they are not nullified. Buffs that are not nullified are War Chant, Rallying Call, Frozen Land vs. Tainted Land, and Frozen Land vs. Elven Wood. No buffs stack with each other in single-player games, and the only nullifiable buffs are Tainted Land vs. Elven Wood. All other buffs remain active in the same place at the same time. In single-player games, buffs stack with only one leadership at a time, and with spells, but do not stack with each other. As mentioned at the beginning of this episode, to appreciate the overhaul and simplification in AOTR of the leadership system, you have to have seen the problems in vanilla. So what does AOTR's buff system look like? Here's a tease, but this will be shown much more in Part 6. This concludes the material on the buff modifier type for the vanilla games. Part 3 of this series will focus on the spell modifier type. This is a modifier that never gets much use in the vast majority of games I've played with players, and I've never seen even one game in which anyone has ever stacked spells in the vanilla games. This is drastically different in the Age of the Ring mod, in which there can be more spells in one faction than all spells from all factions combined in the vanilla games. So in the next part, we'll cover the viability of the spell modifier type in the vanilla games, exploring whether it's worthwhile or overshadowed.